The Silent Prison. How living for others hijacks your freedom. The old monk sat in silence, eyes gently closed, hands resting on his lap, a strand of worn prayer beads loosely wrapped between his fingers. A breeze moved through the temple courtyard, rustling the leaves of the Bodhi tree above him. His robe, faded gold and softened by time, fluttered slightly at the edges. He had not spoken a word all morning, and yet, his presence spoke volumes. His name was Master Renan, a name that, in the ancient tongue, meant, the sun that does not beg for the sky to shine. To the villagers who lived below the misty hills, he was simply, the kind one. They knew him as a gentle figure who listened more than he spoke, who walked barefoot even in winter, and who, despite his age, radiated a strange kind of youthful peace. But few knew the story that brought him here. Even fewer could imagine the prison he had once lived in. Not a prison made of bars and concrete, but a far crueler one. The kind of prison you can't see, yet one that shackles your soul. The kind built from silent expectations, unspoken obligations, and the relentless need to be enough for others. Years ago, Renan had not been a monk. He had been someone else entirely, a scholar, a son, a husband, a father, a community leader. He was praised, respected, admired. People bowed when he entered a room. He had lived a life that, from the outside, appeared full, but the truth? It was hollow. The applause was deafening, but inside, he was screaming, because everything he did, every achievement, every sacrifice, every word he spoke, was crafted not from his truth, but from a desperate desire to fulfill the roles others placed upon him. He had become a master of masks, each one more polished than the last, and yet, behind them all, he was vanishing. He remembered the moment the illusion shattered. It was not a grand event, no catastrophe, no betrayal. It was a whisper. One night, after yet another ceremony honoring his work, another speech where he had said all the right things and smiled the practiced smile, he returned home and found himself unable to breathe. Not from illness, from suffocation. The walls of his house, decorated with plaques and honors, felt like they were closing in. He stepped outside, barefoot, walking into the forest behind his home. The stars blinked above him. The moonlight lit the path forward. And for the first time in decades, he said something aloud, not to his family, not to his peers, but to himself. I don't know who I am anymore. It was terrifying, but it was also the beginning. The silent prison he had been locked in for so long had no guard, no gatekeeper, no lock, just one door, and it had always been open. He had just never dared to walk through it. That night, Renan disappeared. The next morning, the village woke to confusion. His home stood empty, his roles undone, his name whispered in worry. But Renan? He had walked deeper into the forest, deeper into himself, and eventually, he arrived at the foot of the mountain, where the old monastery waited, silent, forgotten, and wild. Over the years, he rebuilt it, not just the walls and the roof, but his soul, slowly, patiently, day by day, brick by brick. The villagers thought he had gone mad. They didn't understand. Why would a man give up everything? The truth was simpler than they could accept. He had given up nothing. He had reclaimed himself. That was years ago. Now, every morning, pilgrims climb the stone steps to meet him. They bring questions, wounds, weariness, and he offers them not answers, but presence, not solutions, but stories, because Renan knows that the greatest chains are the ones we don't see, and the hardest prison to escape is the life we live for everyone but ourselves. He often begins with a question, the same one he once asked himself. Whose voice do you hear when you make your choices? Is it your parents' voice? A boss's expectations? Society's drumbeat of achievement? The echoes of your past mistakes? Your fears? Or is it your own? Most people fall silent when he asks, because they realize they've been living someone else's dream, walking someone else's path, dancing to a song they never chose. And somewhere along the way, they stopped asking what they truly wanted. Renan tells them the story of the invisible script. It begins at birth. You are handed a role, good child. You learn quickly that love often feels conditional. Be quiet. Be polite. Be what we expect. You grow, and the roles multiply: student, partner, worker, parent, each with unspoken rules, each with rewards for obedience. Say the right things, wear the right clothes, achieve the right goals, smile, nod, belong. But no one ever teaches you how to ask, do these roles fit my soul? By the time most people reach adulthood, they've accumulated layer upon layer of masks. And the more masks they wear, the more applause they receive. But the applause doesn't reach their heart. Because deep down, they know, every cheer is for the mask, not for them. That's the prison. You become successful, but feel unfulfilled. You're surrounded by people, but feel unknown. You achieve your dreams, only to realize they weren't even your dreams. And you wake up, day after day, wondering, is this it? Renan remembers that ache. He says it feels like trying to drink from an empty cup. The outside looks full, but inside, there's nothing left to pour. That's when suffering begins, not because life is cruel, but because you've become a stranger to yourself. You've abandoned your own voice for the illusion of harmony. You've silenced your truth to keep others comfortable. But here's the secret Renan shares with those who truly listen. You don't have to live like that. You were not born to be a mirror for others. You were born to shine. You don't need permission. You don't need approval. You don't even need to be understood. You only need the courage to return to yourself. The first step? Silence. Renan teaches that silence is not emptiness. It is the beginning of hearing yourself again. It is where you unearth the questions buried under years of noise. What do I want? What do I believe? What do I feel? And slowly, the answers come, not all at once, but like dawn, one ray, then another, until the light returns. So if you're watching this now, perhaps it's not an accident. Perhaps some part of you is stirring. The part that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. The part that aches not for applause, but for peace. The part that longs not to be admired, but to be free. That part is sacred. And it's calling you home. The door is still open. You just have to walk through it. If this message stirred something in your heart, consider subscribing to Buddhism in Every Moment. We share stories, insights, and quiet truths that help you return to yourself and reclaim the freedom that has always been yours. Let us continue this journey together. The path awaits. Now, breathe. Your freedom begins here. 2. The disease to please, breaking the cycle of self-betrayal. The morning air was crisp in the high mountains as the monk stepped barefoot onto the stone path winding between the ancient cherry trees of the monastery. A gentle mist still clung to the air, softening the golden light that filtered through the petals. He walked slowly, each step silent, deliberate. The robe wrapped around his slender frame whispered against his ankles. His eyes were calm, but his heart carried the memory of yesterday, a conversation with a young traveler who had come seeking not answers, but permission. The young man's name was Ethan. He had arrived with fire in his eyes, cloaked in the armor of ambition and exhaustion. I've done everything they said would make me happy, he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of years of silent conformity. I got the degree. I landed the job. I bought the car. I even smiled when I didn't want to. But I feel like I'm disappearing. The monk listened, his gaze never leaving Ethan's trembling hands. He had seen this illness before, not of the body, but of the soul. The disease to please. It was quiet and deadly. It spread through generations, wearing many names. Obedience, success, responsibility, loyalty, love. But underneath, it was the same craving. The desperate need to be enough for everyone else, while silently betraying oneself. When the monk finally spoke, his voice was steady as the mountain wind. Have you ever noticed, Ethan, he said, that when a tree grows, It never asks the forest for approval. It simply reaches toward the sun. Ethan looked down. But how'd I stop needing their approval? If I stop pleasing them, will there be anything left of me? The monk did not answer immediately. He rose and led Ethan to the pond where lotus flowers floated in serene defiance against the dark water. Watch, he said. They stood in silence as a dragonfly skimmed the surface and a koi fish stirred the water below. Then the monk spoke again. The lotus doesn't bloom because the water is clean. It blooms despite the mud. It never asks the frogs if it's beautiful. It doesn't beg the wind to notice it. It simply is. Ethan closed his eyes. Something inside him shifted, and that was the moment the monk knew. This lesson needed to be told not just to Ethan, but to everyone still dancing the exhausting choreography of acceptance. Because here is the truth. The greatest tragedy is not in being rejected. It is in rejecting yourself in small, invisible ways. Daily. Just to win the affection of those who may never truly see you. The disease to please begins early. As children, we are rewarded for obedience, punished for resistance. We learn that good means agreeable, that silence is preferable to truth, that our worth is determined not by our joy, but by how well we fit the mold carved by others' expectations. By the time we are adults, we are fluent in this self-abandonment. We say, yes, when we mean, no. We smile when we want to scream. We apologize for existing in a way that is too loud, too quiet, too bold, too soft, and all the while, our inner voice fades like an echo in an empty hall. But the monk knew. People do not lose themselves all at once. They vanish in pieces, a dream silenced here, a truth unspoken there, a boundary crossed, a longing buried, a life half-lived. And yet, the most dangerous part of this disease is how noble it appears. To serve, to care, to sacrifice, we are praised for these things. We mistake them for love. But what is love that costs you your soul? Self-betrayal, the monk once told Ethan, is a slow poison. It tastes sweet at first, like approval, like applause, but with time, it hollows you out from within. Ethan had asked him then, so how do I stop? I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to be selfish. And the monk had smiled gently. To stop betraying yourself is not selfish. It is sacred. He explained that true compassion begins within. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot love authentically while bleeding silently. You cannot be whole for others if you are fractured inside. So many people live on autopilot, running themselves ragged to meet standards they never chose, wearing masks they no longer recognize. But Buddhism teaches us this. The way out is not through rebellion, but through remembrance. Remember who you were before the world told you who to be. The monk had once wandered as a young man too, long before he wore saffron robes or spoke in quiet metaphors. He had been a son, a student, a worker. He had tried so hard to be all the things others expected. But one morning, after years of fatigue and smiles that no longer reached his eyes, he awoke with a startling realization. He did not know the sound of his own soul. That realization didn't come with fireworks or drama. It came quietly, like a whisper that refused to be silenced. That day, he walked out of the life he had built for others and into the unknown, into himself. It was the hardest thing he ever did, and the most honest. To break the cycle of self-betrayal is not to become cold or cruel. It is to become real. It is learning to say no without guilt, and yes without resentment. It is choosing rest over reputation, peace over performance, truth over harmony. It is allowing yourself to disappoint others rather than abandon yourself. Ethan's journey wasn't instant. There were days he still sought approval, moments he questioned his right to be free. But little by little, with the monk's guidance, he began to listen to the quiet ache in his chest, to the spark of forgotten dreams, to the voice that said, "You were never meant to be a mirror. You were meant to be a flame." He started small. He declined invitations that drained him. He wrote in a journal without worrying if the words sounded wise. He laughed louder, walked slower, slept deeper, and when the guilt came, and it did, the monk reminded him, "This guilt is not truth. It is a ghost of your old training. Let it pass. Keep going." And Ethan did. So must you. Because this is not a story about Ethan. It is a mirror for you. Ask yourself, where are you still performing? Where do you abandon yourself daily? Just to earn a nod of approval? What have you silenced that needs to be heard? What have you buried that is still alive? You are not here to live as someone's ideal. You are here to be whole. You are here to be true. You are here to be free. And that freedom will cost you something. It will cost you your masks. It will cost you your performance. It will cost you the illusion that pleasing others is the path to peace. But what you gain is priceless. A life that feels like home. And just like that, the monk rose again the next morning. Mist covered the hills. Birds called out from the trees. He looked out over the path, knowing another seeker would soon arrive, carrying a question they couldn't quite name. And he would be there, waiting, not with answers, but with space. And one by one, like Ethan, they would remember who they were. They would return to themselves. And so, as the candle of this chapter fades, the question rises, what would your life become if you stopped apologizing for existing? What might unfold if you walked through the fire of discomfort and claimed your truth fully, without permission? Hold on to that question, because in the next chapter, we will go deeper into the shadows of self-worth and the radiant light waiting on the other side of fear. Come with me, let's step into the truth. You don't need permission to shine. 3. You don't need permission to shine. The storm came at midnight. Winds howled like ghosts across the ancient tiles of the monastery roof. Trees bent under the weight of rain. Lightning flickered like a restless heartbeat across the sky. But within the stone walls of the prayer hall, there was only stillness. A single candle burned on the altar, casting a gentle glow across the worn face of the monk, who sat in silence, his hands gently wrapped around his prayer beads. Ethan sat across from him, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the flickering flame. His face was tight with emotion, his eyes tired from a restless day. He had come to the temple seeking peace, but instead, he found something more disorienting, himself. "I feel like I've been hiding my whole life," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Afraid to be too much. Afraid to be too bright. Afraid that if I shine, someone will try to put me out." The monk nodded slowly. "And so you dimmed yourself?" Ethan looked away. "I became what they needed me to be, not what I truly was. I lowered my voice. I held back my opinions. I buried my talents. I told myself it was humility, but now it feels like fear." The monk turned his gaze to the candle. Its flame, though small, danced confidently against the darkness. "Do you think the candle asks the night for permission to burn?" Ethan shook his head. "No," the monk continued. "It simply burns, because that is its nature." Silence hung between them. Then, the monk spoke again, slower this time. "There is a sacred truth many people never hear in their lifetime. You don't need permission to be who you are. You never did. You don't need the world to approve your light before you shine." The wind howled louder. Ethan listened. "In this world," the monk continued, "we are taught from a young age that being small is safe. That not drawing attention protects us from judgment. That we must wait until someone else tells us we are ready, or worthy, or good enough. And so we become skilled at waiting, for a promotion, for validation, for applause, for some mythical sign that says, now you may live as yourself." "But it never comes," Ethan murmured. "No," the monk said. "It does not, because the world will never hand you the key to your own freedom. It will offer you chains disguised as praise, and cages built from approval." He leaned closer now, his voice softer but stronger. "You are not here to decorate someone else's expectations. You are here to blaze like the morning sun." A sudden crack of thunder echoed through the hall. as if the sky itself was affirming the monk's words. Ethan exhaled a deep, aching breath. He had been waiting for permission his whole life, from teachers, from family, from bosses, from strangers, even from people who never asked for that role. But now, sitting in this quiet storm with an old monk and a burning candle, he realized something revolutionary. The permission he had been waiting for was already within him. The monk stood slowly and motioned for Ethan to follow. They stepped out into the storm, robes soaked instantly, but neither of them flinched. The rain was cold but cleansing, the wind loud but honest. They walked silently to the cliffside at the edge of the monastery grounds. From there, the valley stretched out like a dream, dark, vast, and alive. The monk pointed to the horizon where the storm clouds parted just slightly and a single star glimmered in the sky. "You see that star?" he said. "It shines whether you see it or not. It doesn't wait for you to look up. It simply shines because that is its truth." Ethan stood in awe, the rain washing away something heavy inside him. For the first time in years, he felt something flicker in his chest, not anxiety, not fear, but power, quiet, steady. His own light, long buried, was still there. The monk's words returned like a drumbeat. "You don't need permission to shine. Too many of us shrink to fit into rooms never built for our souls. We water ourselves down so we won't offend. We hide our brilliance under layers of apology. But that is not humility. That is self-erasure. True humility is knowing your light and sharing it without arrogance or fear." The monk had lived this lesson himself. Long ago, in his own youth, he had studied under a master who spoke rarely but saw deeply. One day, as a novice, he had been afraid to share his ideas during a temple meeting. Afterward, the master pulled him aside and said only one sentence: "To withhold your truth is not a kindness, it is a cowardice." Those words pierced the monk like an arrow. And over the years, he learned that the world does not need more silent saints. It needs awakened souls, courageous, flawed, glowing from the inside out. Souls who stop waiting to be chosen and begin choosing themselves. He shared this story with Ethan days later. As they walked through the village market, Ethan listened carefully, his eyes brighter now, his steps lighter. "Don't confuse acceptance with alignment," the monk told him. "Just because others approve of your life doesn't mean it's the life meant for you. And just because others don't understand your path doesn't mean it isn't sacred." He gestured to a small bamboo flute at one of the stalls. "You see that?" he said. "That flute does not try to be a drum. It sings its own note. And only in doing so can it contribute to the symphony of life." Ethan picked up the flute. He smiled. The monk smiled too, because he knew this was what it meant to return to the self. To stop performing and start expressing. To stop surviving and start living. And so Ethan began. He spoke up in places where he used to stay silent. He let his laughter echo when something delighted him. He pursued an old passion, painting, and hung his work in the village square. Even though his hands trembled at first, some didn't understand him, some even judged him. But others were inspired. Because light invites light. When you give yourself permission to shine, you give others permission to do the same. It creates a chain of courage. And the world needs more courage. More people choosing their own light over borrowed shadows. One evening, Ethan returned to the cliff where he had once stood in the storm. The sky was clear this time. Stars scattered like diamonds. He brought a lantern with him, but didn't light it. He sat in the dark. And still, he shone. Because he had learned that his light wasn't something outside of him. It was within. Always had been. As he sat there, the monk's words returned to him once more. "You don't need permission to shine. You never did. You only needed to remember. And maybe, so do you. You who has been waiting for the world to approve of your dreams. You who hides your gifts so as not to outshine others. You who has mistaken playing small for playing safe. The truth is simple, and it is this: you are not here to be light. You are here to be light." And in the next part of our story, we will go even deeper into the quiet war between validation and worth, and how to reclaim the only approval that truly matters, your own. Come, the path is calling. 4. Rooted like a mountain, finding inner approval. The mist that morning hung low over the valley, curling through the bamboo groves like quiet questions unsaid. Master Anzu rose early, as he always did, long before the birds stirred. His ochre robes whispered as he moved through the monastery grounds. Beads clutched gently in his right hand. He had been awake since the moon was high, sleep broken by the dreams again. Silent visions of his younger self wandering through cities of faces that never truly saw him. He stepped beyond the old wooden gate and followed the path toward the waterfall nestled between the cliffs. A place he often visited in search of clarity. The stones beneath his feet were slick, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, perhaps from pilgrims just like him, souls searching not for fame, not for fortune, but for something far rarer, peace. He reached the ledge and sat. The roar of the water echoed through the valley, and beneath its sound, a deeper silence waited, a silence not empty, but full of knowing, of presence. And that morning, for the first time in many days, the monk closed his eyes, not to retreat, but to listen. In the world he had once known, long before the quiet of temple bells and tea-scented mornings, Anzu had lived among the striving. He had walked city streets where worth was measured in applause and popularity, where the eyes of others were like gods, and to be ignored was to cease to exist. He remembered a time, decades past, when he stood on stages and bowed, the applause washing over him like a tide. He remembered how intoxicating it felt to be seen, to be validated, and he remembered the emptiness that followed when the curtain fell. The seats emptied, and the silence returned. He had been someone, until he wasn't. That memory returned now, not to haunt him, but to teach. He whispered aloud, more to the wind than to himself. It is only when the world turns away that you hear your true name. There is a quiet prison, Anzu had come to learn, built not of bars but of eyes, and it is the most dangerous one of all, for it is invisible, and it is voluntary. Every nod we chase, every compliment we hunger for, every decision made to be liked, it all builds the walls higher. And the higher those walls grow, the farther we stray from the ground of our own truth. Anzu had seen this not only in himself, but in countless visitors who came to the monastery, men and women wrapped in the garments of success, yet burdened with invisible chains. One woman, Helen, an accomplished lawyer from the West, once asked him why she felt hollow after winning a case that had taken years to prepare. "I should feel proud," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But all I feel is, gone. Like I've disappeared." The monk had said nothing at the time, only poured her tea, and offered her silence. But later, he had told her the story of the mountain. There was once a small tree growing beside a great mountain. He began, and every day, the tree stretched higher, hoping the wind would applaud. One day, a storm came, and the tree bent with the gale, desperate to be liked by the sky. But the mountain stood still, unmoved. It did not crave applause. It did not bend for praise. And after the storm, only the mountain remained. Helen had listened and nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the warm teacup. And in that stillness, a seed was planted. That story wasn't for Helen alone. It was for Anzu too. He had spent too many years twisting himself into shapes others would accept, becoming smaller to fit their expectations, dimming his light to avoid their jealousy, nodding when he wanted to scream. He had once mistaken harmony for peace. But harmony that silences truth is not peace. It is self-abandonment dressed in politeness. He took a deep breath now. At the cliff's edge, the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing the vast stretch of land below, villages waking, smoke rising from chimneys, rivers tracing their slow paths like veins of the earth itself. And there, beneath it all, was the truth he had come to accept. The only approval that matters is the kind that lives within. This was the teaching the wind offered him each morning. A leaf falls. Does it ask the wind for permission? A stone lies in silence. Does it care if it is praised? The stars shine, alone and vast. Do they shrink when unseen? No. And so too must we. The trap of outer approval is not just spiritual, it is deeply psychological. The modern world is wired to keep us seeking, comparing, doubting. One scroll through a screen, and a person's self-worth crumbles. Why are they loved more than me? Why are they happier, thinner, smarter? This constant surveillance of others and of ourselves has created a world of inner famine, where we starve for something we already carry, worth. Enzu had watched young monks fall into this too. Even in the monastery, the ego finds clever disguises. One might overpractice just to gain the master's praise. Another might quote scripture not from devotion, but for admiration. Even solitude can become a performance. But he had learned that the answer wasn't to abandon the desire to be seen, but to trace it inward. Like a river to its source. Why do I need their approval? What part of me still believes I am not enough? And then, to sit with that question, not to fix it, not to argue with it, but to hold it gently, as one might hold a wounded child. One afternoon, a young novice, Koji, approached Enzu with downcast eyes. "Master," he said, "I feel invisible. No one seems to notice my effort. I train, I clean, I chant, but the elder monks, they look through me." Enzu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and asked, "When you sweep the path, who do you sweep for?" Koji hesitated. "For the monastery, for the master, for everyone." Enzu smiled softly. "Then that is why you are invisible. Sweep for the path itself. Sweep for the silence. Sweep because it aligns your heart with peace. And in time, even if no one sees, you will." There is a strange freedom in being unseen. It strips away performance. It invites authenticity. The less we depend on recognition, the more we begin to recognize ourselves. This was what the mountain knew. And now, sitting beneath the vast sky, Enzu too was rooted, not in applause, not in status, but in presence, in the quiet knowing that he was. And that was enough. The truth is, you cannot serve the world if you are chained by its opinions. You cannot love purely if you are desperate to be loved back. And you cannot grow fully if your worth is measured by others' eyes. Approval must be an inside job. To be rooted like a mountain is to say, "I know who I am. I know what I value. I act from that knowing. And if I am misunderstood, criticized, or ignored, I will still stand." In a world obsessed with more validation, more likes, more affirmation, true liberation is less noise, less comparison, less performing. What remains, when all of that falls away, is peace. As the sun broke through the last of the fog, Enzu opened his eyes. He stood, slowly, his knees stiff with age, his breath steady with knowing. He turned back toward the monastery, each step quiet and firm. In the distance, a bell rang, the call to morning meditation. As he walked, he whispered a final thought, not for himself, but for those who would one day hear his story. Be like the mountain, rooted, still, unshakable, not because you are hard, but because you are whole. And so we leave Enzu, for now, his footsteps vanishing into the stone path behind him. But his lesson remains. In the next part of our journey, we follow a different trail, one where love, once thought selfless, reveals itself as a mirror, where living for others is redefined not as duty, but as overflow, a life that gives, not from need, but from fullness, a life that shines, not for permission, but because it cannot help but shine. 5. Living for yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. The mountain air was crisp, laced with the faint scent of pine and the distant melody of temple bells echoing from the valley below. The monastery perched upon the hill seemed suspended between heaven and earth, a sanctuary untouched by the world's frantic pull. In the heart of this stillness sat Master Enzu, the elderly monk in a golden robe, his weathered hands gently clasping a string of prayer beads. His eyes, though half closed in contemplation, seemed to reflect the infinite sky itself, vast, calm, and boundless. On this morning, a young traveler named Kato had arrived at the temple. Disheveled, overwhelmed, and desperate for clarity, he knelt before Master Anzu and bowed deeply. "Master," he said with a trembling voice, "I feel selfish for wanting to live my own life. Everyone tells me I must sacrifice for others, my parents, my partner, my community, and yet, I feel like I am suffocating." Master Anzu looked at him with no judgment, only compassion. "My child," the monk replied, his voice as soft as the breeze rustling the bamboo leaves. "They have taught you to be useful, but they forgot to teach you how to be free." Kato's eyes filled with tears. "I thought devotion meant surrendering who I am to others." Master Anzu shook his head slowly. "No, devotion begins by honoring the life within you first. How can you give anything genuine to the world if you do not first belong to yourself?" The sacred fire at the heart of the monastery crackled gently in the brazier beside them. And Master Anzu began his teaching. Many are told that selflessness is the highest virtue, but there is a dangerous illusion in this belief when it is misunderstood. Selflessness does not mean erasing yourself. It means seeing clearly where your actions come from. Are they from love? Or from fear? He paused, letting the silence breathe between the words. To live for yourself, truly, is not to deny the world. It is to honor the divine spark placed within you. That spark is not selfish. It is sacred. Master Anzu motioned for Kato to follow him through the garden path, where the first plum blossoms had begun to bloom, delicate and bold. "Let me tell you a story," the monk continued. "There once was a man who spent his whole life building a bridge for others. Day after day, stone by stone, he sacrificed his time, his dreams, his strength. People praised him. 'Look at how generous he is,' they said. But no one asked what bridge he truly wanted to build. When he died, the bridge led nowhere. He had forgotten to ask where his own heart wished to go." Kato walked in silence beside him, the truth of the parable landing in his chest like a gong's deep vibration. "You see, Kato," Master Anzu said, "there is a difference between a gift given in love and a life lived in slavery to expectation." They reached the koi pond, where the fish glided effortlessly through mirrored waters. "Have you ever watched these fish?" the monk asked. Kato nodded. "They seem so at peace." "They are," Anzu smiled, "because they do not swim to impress the sky. They follow the currents they were born to. That is not selfish. That is truth." And in that moment, the young man felt a warmth rise in his chest, a quiet permission he never knew he needed. The permission to live. But the monk was not finished. He led Kato deeper into the inner sanctum, a quiet room lined with scrolls and candles. There, he unrolled an ancient parchment with a single line of calligraphy. "When you light your own lamp, you light the path for others. Do you understand?" Anzu asked. "I think I'm beginning to," Kato replied. "To abandon yourself is the real betrayal," the monk said. "When you honor your truth, when you care for your own spirit, you become like a sun, shining warmth on all who walk near you. But a man who dims his light for others leads no one. He only adds to the darkness." Kato sank to his knees, overwhelmed. "But, won't people hate me for choosing myself?" Anzu placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yes, some will, because your liberation reminds them of their chains. But others will see your courage and remember their own." There was silence again, and then the monk whispered something that echoed in the young man's soul for the rest of his life. To live for yourself is not to be selfish. It is to be sacred. And when the sacred is honored within, the whole world becomes more holy. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of fire and rose, Master Anzu walked slowly back to the temple steps. He looked out over the valley where lanterns were beginning to flicker on, one by one. "This," he said quietly, "is what the world needs more of, not more martyrs of expectation, but more awakened hearts on fire with their own truth." Kato stood beside him, a different man than when he'd arrived. The prison had begun to crack, and through the cracks, the light of his own sacred path began to shine. And now, dear listener, I ask you, have you abandoned your own sacred light to meet the expectations of others? What would happen if today you simply gave yourself permission to live? There is so much more to uncover. Join us next in part 6. The Quiet Power of Saying No, where Master Anzu reveals why boundaries are the true gateways to freedom. And if this touched you, if something stirred in your chest as you listened, subscribe to our channel. Buddhism in every moment. Help us bring more stories like this into the world. Your support is what lights this sacred fire. 6. Create a life on your terms. The wind had shifted by the time Kato returned to the stone bench beneath the ginkgo tree. Weeks had passed since he first arrived at the monastery. Yet time here did not march, it drifted. Like incense rising in still air. The golden leaves overhead trembled in the breeze, as if whispering secrets only the awakened could understand. Master Anzu stood nearby, tending to a small flame beneath an iron kettle. The monk moved slowly, purposefully, his every gesture a quiet sermon on mindfulness. Kato had been watching him for days. How he woke with the sun. How he bowed to the ground before stepping into the garden. How he smiled at ants as if they, too, were sacred. This morning, Kato had a question that weighed heavy on his chest. Master, he said, how do I create a life that is truly mine? The monk lifted his gaze. His eyes didn't startle, they welcomed. That is the question most people forget to ask. Master Anzu said gently, most are too busy living someone else's idea of life. He handed Kato a steaming cup of tea and gestured for him to sit. Let me tell you a story. The monk began. About a sculptor from the southern valley. There was a man who carved statues so beautiful. Even kings traveled to request his work. But one day, after decades of fame, he laid down his chisel and disappeared into the forest. Years later, when a traveler found him living in a small hut, whittling birds out of driftwood, he asked, "Why did you give up greatness?" The sculptor smiled, "Because I realized I had never once carved what my heart desired. Every statue I created belonged to someone else. But this bird," he held up a delicate piece of cedar, "this bird belongs to me." Kato listened in silence. The fire between them crackled like truth burning through illusion. Master Anzu leaned forward, his prayer beads dangling from his wrist. "Until you ask yourself what is truly yours," he said, "you will be haunted by borrowed dreams. A life on your terms is not a rebellion. It is a return." "A return to what?" Kato asked. "To the center," the monk replied. "To that sacred place within where your path whispers, even when the world screams." The young man swallowed hard. "But what if I don't know what I want?" "Then your first task," Master Anzu said, "is not to act, but to listen. Listen until the noise of obligation fades and the voice of your soul speaks. That voice is soft, because it has waited patiently for you. It will not shout like the world, it will ask." Kato closed his eyes and tried to listen, but all he could hear was confusion. Anzu rose, and motioned for him to follow. They walked deep into the bamboo grove, where the world grew quiet and green. At the center stood a solitary stone well. Its waters reflected the sky above, and nothing more. "Look into the well," the monk instructed. Kato peered in. "I only see myself." "Good." Anzu nodded. "That is where your life begins." The monk dipped a ladle into the water and poured it into the earth. "Your life is a garden," he said, "and every choice is a seed. When you follow the approval of others, you plant thorns. When you follow truth, you plant blossoms. But how do I know if it's truth?" "You feel it," Anzu replied. "Truth feels like peace, even if it is difficult. Lies feel like safety, but always come with a cost." They sat on the mossy stones beside the well. The silence wrapped around them, not empty but full, like the breath before a song. Master Anzu pulled a parchment from his sleeve and unrolled it carefully. On it were scribbled the names of villagers from decades past. people he had counseled, guided, and watched with love. I keep this, he said softly, to remind myself that every person has their own path. My role is not to walk it for them, but to keep the lantern lit. He handed Cato the parchment. You now carry your own lantern. The monk said, will you walk toward your life? Or stay lost in someone else's map? Cato stared at the names. They were ink on paper, but somehow, they felt alive. Choices, regrets, liberations. He looked up. What if walking my path means losing people I care about? Anzu placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then let them go with love. He said, some will return, transformed, others will not, but no one who truly sees your soul will ever ask you to abandon it. A wind passed through the grove, and the bamboo whispered like old friends exchanging secrets. You see, the monk continued, the life built on your terms is not always easier, but it is always truer. And truth, though costly, is the only soil where your spirit can bloom. They began the walk back toward the temple. Cato felt the shift, not a dramatic thunderclap of realization, but the quiet, sacred turning of a key within a lock long sealed. The sun was high now, spilling golden light across the path. I understand now, Cato said. I don't want a life that impresses others. I want a life that frees me. Anzu smiled. Then you are already building it. And so, a seed was planted, not one of defiance, but of return. A return to the center, to the self, to the sacred silence that had always waited beneath the noise. You, dear listener, do you feel it too? That ache for something more honest, more yours? 7. Your worth was never meant to be negotiated. The morning fog lay heavy across the temple's old wooden bridge, curling in quiet ribbons around the stone lanterns like a veil obscuring the world. Cato stepped onto the bridge slowly, his sandals pressing soft indentations into the dew-covered planks. In his hand, he clutched a folded note, not addressed to anyone, not even himself, but written in the ink of raw emotion. For days, he had been unable to sleep, not because of noise or discomfort. The monastery was serene as always, but because of the constant negotiations taking place inside his own mind. If I do this, will they finally accept me? If I change that, will they still love me? If I don't live up to what they expect, what happens to me then? He felt like a merchant in a busy marketplace, bartering pieces of his soul for scraps of validation. And the cost, he realized, was becoming unbearable. Master Anzu appeared without a sound, stepping beside him as if summoned by the ache in his heart. The monk said nothing at first. He simply stood, prayer beads in hand, eyes gazing out over the fog. After a long pause, he said softly, "There is a story I once heard, not from a sutra, but from an old man who had lived a life of deep wounds and slow healing. There was once a jade merchant who possessed a gem of immeasurable worth, one unlike any other in the world. People traveled from all corners of the land to make him offers. Some brought gold, others silver, some brought kingdoms in promises. And though their words were sweet, the merchant saw greed in their eyes. He refused every offer. One day, a stranger came. She carried nothing. When she saw the gem, she smiled and simply said, 'That is beautiful.' Then she turned to leave. The merchant called out to her, 'Aren't you going to make an offer?' She shook her head gently. Some things are not meant to be bought. They are meant to be seen. And with that, she disappeared into the crowd. Anzu turned to Cato. 'You are the gem, my child, but you've been believing the lie that you must be sold to be seen.' Cato's throat tightened. 'But why do I feel like I'm not enough unless someone else tells me I am?' 'Because,' the monk said, his voice like the hush of water over stone, 'you've been taught to look outward for your worth, and what is offered from the outside can always be taken away.' They began walking the path that curved behind the temple, through a corridor of flowering plum trees. The blossoms were beginning to fall, soft and weightless like forgotten dreams. 'In this world,' Anzu continued, 'people will try to price you, with labels, with titles, with praise and blame. But what is sacred cannot be priced. What is eternal cannot be negotiated. Kato stopped beneath one of the trees and looked up. The falling petals reminded him of applause, momentary, fading as quickly as it came. I've lived my entire life trying to be the person others needed me to be. He whispered. I thought that made me worthy. Anzu placed a hand over his heart. True worth is not built on performance. It is revealed in presence. You are not valuable because of what you do. You are valuable because of what you are, a unique expression of life itself. He let the silence hang there, long enough for it to sink in. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, and Kato, even the sun never apologizes for shining. The words struck Kato deep. He thought of every moment he had shrunk himself to fit into someone else's mold. Every time he had hidden his truth behind a polished smile. Every choice he had made not from desire but from fear of rejection. They walked until they reached a small, moss-covered bench beside a koi pond. The fish swam in lazy circles, unhurried, unconcerned with how they were perceived. Let me ask you, said Master Anzu, when a flower blooms in the forest, does it wait for someone to applaud before opening? Kato shook his head. No, the monk said. It blooms because it is time. He pulled out a piece of parchment from his robe, blank, clean, pure. I want you to write something, he said, handing it to Kato. Not for anyone else, not for the world, just for your soul. Kato hesitated, then took the parchment and wrote, I am no longer available for negotiation. My worth is not a transaction. It is a truth. He looked up, breathless. Something inside him had cracked open. Anzu smiled, eyes twinkling. Then you have begun. As they sat by the pond, a butterfly landed on Kato's knee. He didn't move. He simply watched it, the way one watches a miracle. He realized in that moment, the miracle wasn't that the butterfly came. The miracle was that it came when he finally stopped chasing it. You see, dear listener, perhaps you too have been negotiating your worth, bending, twisting, trading pieces of yourself for moments of acceptance. But what if I told you, you don't need to audition for love. You don't need to prove yourself to belong. You don't need to be useful to be worthy. Your worth was never meant to be negotiated. It was meant to be lived. So live it. 8. Let go of the illusion of control. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the monastery, its rays filtering through the ancient pine trees that stood as silent sentinels around the temple grounds. Master Anzu sat in his usual spot by the koi pond, the gentle ripples of water mirroring the serenity in his gaze. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, a reminder of the ever-changing nature of life. Kato approached, his footsteps hesitant, eyes clouded with unease. He had been grappling with a storm within, a relentless need to control every facet of his existence, only to find himself ensnared in anxiety and disappointment. Master, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Why does it feel like the more I try to control my life, the more it slips through my fingers? Master Anzu looked up, a soft smile playing on his lips. Because, my dear Kato, control is a mirage we chase in the desert of uncertainty. The tighter we grip, the more life wriggles free. He gestured for Kato to sit beside him. Let me tell you a story, he said, his voice as soothing as the rustling leaves. There was once a farmer who, upon hearing that a storm was approaching, built a sturdy shelter for his crops. He reinforced the walls, secured the roof, and prayed fervently. But the storm changed course, and his neighbor's fields, unprotected and wild, flourished with unexpected rain. The farmer, in his attempt to control nature, missed the blessings that surrender could have brought. Kato pondered the tale, the weight of its meaning settling in his heart. In our quest for control, Master Anzu continued, we often build walls to shield ourselves from the unpredictable. Yet, in doing so, we may also block the very winds of change that carry growth and transformation. He picked up a fallen leaf, its edges tinged with the colors of autumn. This leaf does not resist the wind, it dances with it. It does not cling to the branch when its time has come, it lets go. Trusting the journey ahead, Kato watched the leaf as it floated gently onto the pond's surface, carried effortlessly by the water's flow. But how'd I let go, Master? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. How'd I surrender when fear grips me so tightly? Master Anzu placed a reassuring hand on Kato's shoulder. Letting go is not a single act, but a continuous practice. It begins with awareness, recognizing when we are clinging, when we are resisting the natural flow of life. He paused, allowing the silence to envelop them. Breathe, he instructed. Inhale the present moment, exhale the need for control. With each breath, remind yourself that you are part of a greater rhythm, one that cannot be dictated but can be embraced. Kato closed his eyes, focusing on his breath, feeling the tension slowly melt away. Remember, Master Anzu said softly, the river does not fight the rocks in its path, it flows around them. In yielding, it finds its strength. As the sun climbed higher, casting shimmering patterns on the pond's surface, Kato felt a newfound sense of peace. The illusion of control had been a heavy burden, but in releasing it, he discovered the lightness of being. Master Anzu stood, his robes rustling gently. Come, he said, let us walk the path of surrender together, one step at a time. They strolled through the garden, the world around them alive with the symphony of nature. Birds sang, flowers bloomed, and the wind whispered secrets of freedom to those willing to listen. In that moment, Kato understood that true liberation lay not in mastering the world, but in mastering the art of letting go. 9. Peace from the inside out, anchoring yourself in stillness. A quiet mist clung to the morning air, shrouding the temple grounds in a veil of silver calm. Dew kissed the tips of the blades of grass, and the distant echo of a temple bell rang like a call back to the present moment. Master Anzu stood beneath a sprawling plum tree, his yellow robe stirring lightly in the breeze, prayer beads gently dangling from his right hand as if counting not just time, but lifetimes. Beside him stood Kato, now changed from the restless, anxious man he had once been, though still carrying traces of old questions in his eyes. His breath was steadier, his shoulders less burdened, but this morning, a deeper silence filled the space between them, not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. Master, Kato said finally, I've learned to let go. I've learned to walk away from what no longer serves me. But even now, the world still pulls at me, news, worries, voices, responsibilities. Where do I go to find peace when I'm not here in this temple? Master Anzu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat slowly on a flat stone by the lotus pond and gestured for Kato to join him. The water was still, a perfect mirror reflecting the vast blue sky above and the cloud that drifted like a whispered thought. True peace, he began, is not a place you visit. It is a place you anchor into. If you rely on your surroundings to be calm, your inner world will always be hostage to chaos. He let the words settle. There's a stillness that lives inside you, Kato. Most people spend their lives searching for peace outside, through achievement, approval, or distraction. But that's like trying to still a pond by stirring it. The more you reach outward, the more turbulent your mind becomes. Kato nodded slowly. But how'd I find this stillness in the noise of everyday life? Master Anzu smiled gently. Let me tell you the story of a bell that sang without being struck. Kato leaned in. There was once a monastery perched high in the mountains where a great bell stood in the center. Pilgrims from across the land came to strike the bell and hear its deep, resonant song. But one day, a great storm shattered the bell. The monks mourned. Without its sound, they feared their prayers could not reach the heavens. But there was a young novice who would sit beside the broken bell each dawn and meditate in silence. One morning, as the wind passed through the remnants of the bell's frame, a faint but beautiful hum emerged. The wind had found the resonance hidden within the silence itself. Master Anzu turned to Kato. You see, silence is not emptiness. Stillness is not absence. Within it lies music, wisdom, and clarity, but you must be quiet enough to hear it. The two sat in silence for a while. A bird fluttered by. Somewhere in the distance, a bamboo chime sang gently in the wind. Kato closed his eyes. He could feel it now, the quiet hum beneath the noise of his thoughts. Like the vibration of the earth itself. He realized he didn't need the world to slow down. He needed to stop letting it dictate the rhythm of his breath. Peace, Master Anzu continued, is the alignment between your breath, your awareness, and the moment in front of you. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, just this. Kato opened his eyes. But what about action? What about when I must face conflict or chaos? Doesn't peace mean I avoid the fire? Master Anzu chuckled softly, his prayer beads clicking as he moved his fingers. No, peace is not the absence of fire. It is becoming the still flame that burns without consuming. You carry it within, whether in traffic, in boardrooms, or in heartbreak. Stillness isn't about hiding, it's about anchoring. He looked toward the horizon. And anchoring requires practice. It is a discipline. Meditation is one way, but so is washing a dish with awareness. Walking slowly, pausing before you speak, or even placing your hand on your chest and asking, "What does peace need right now?" Kato sat taller, the words landing like gentle raindrops on fertile soil. I used to think peace was something fragile, he whispered, but now I see, it's a force. It's like the mountain. It doesn't need permission to be. Master Anzu nodded. And when you stop outsourcing your stillness, you reclaim your life. The sun had risen fully now, casting a warm glow over the garden. Bees buzzed among the blossoms, and the pond reflected the sky with unwavering clarity. Kato rose and bowed. I think I'm beginning to hear the bell again. Master Anzu smiled and bowed in return. Then let us prepare to ring it in the world. Not with noise, but with presence. As they walked back to the temple, Kato's steps were slower, deliberate, not because he was unsure, but because he had finally learned the sacred art of pausing. 10. You are not a performer. Reclaim your real self. There is a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when a person realizes they've been living as a mask, not a soul. When the applause fades and no one is watching, the questions creep in like whispers in a dimly lit room. Who am I when I'm not trying to be liked? Who am I when I stop performing? Kato sat alone beneath the Bodhi tree, now deep into his final week in the monastery. The plum blossoms had begun to fall. A gentle breeze carried their pale petals through the air like snowflakes of memory. His fingers rested on his lap. His spine straightened not by effort but by ease. For the first time, there was no pressure in his breath. And yet, inside, a new unrest stirred, not panic, but inquiry. Something honest, something sacred. Master Anzu approached quietly, the prayer beads in his hand swaying like the rhythm of time itself. His yellow robe glowed under the soft morning light. He took his place beside Kato, saying nothing at first. They had learned the language of silence. Finally, Master Anzu spoke. You look like a man standing at a crossroads without a map. Kato smiled, almost embarrassed. I think I'm afraid, Master. Afraid of what? Of leaving here and becoming someone else again. Of slipping back into the old patterns. Of putting the mask on again to please the world. Master Anzu nodded slowly, as if he had heard this fear from 1,000 souls before. The world trains us to become performers, he said. From childhood, we are rewarded not for our truth, but for our compliance. We learn to smile when we're sad, nod when we disagree, achieve even when our hearts cry for rest. He looked toward the temple bell. But the soul cannot thrive in performance. It withers under the spotlight of expectation. Kato's voice trembled. So how do I live in the world without becoming what the world wants me to be? Master Anzu placed his hand on Kato's chest, right over his heart. You must stop auditioning. Kato looked up. Stop auditioning for love, for respect, for validation. You were never meant to prove your worth. You were meant to live your truth. The tree does not ask the forest if it's tall enough. The river does not beg the mountain to let it flow. They simply are. Master Anzu closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. There's a self in you, Kato, that was never touched by judgment, never shaped by applause. It existed before praise and will endure beyond criticism. That self is your true home. Kato's eyes welled with tears, not from sorrow, but from a kind of spiritual homesickness. He had spent so many years perfecting his performance, the ideal employee, the agreeable friend, the dutiful son, but he had forgotten what it was to simply be human. There's a story, Master Anzu continued, about a dancer who was known throughout the empire. Her performances captivated thousands, but when she retired, no one visited her. She had spent her entire life perfecting her stage presence, but had never shown anyone her real face. Kato whispered. She was celebrated, but not seen. Yes, the monk said softly, and many lived the same tragedy. They sat together in silence once more. A single lotus blossom drifted across the surface of the pond. Its movement was effortless. No audience, no choreography, just being. I don't want to go back to performing, Kato said, voice firm now. I want to live as myself, even if it means being misunderstood. Master Anzu smiled, and this time, his eyes crinkled like the folds of ancient scrolls. Then you are free. Kato frowned slightly. That's all? Yes, the monk said. The moment you give yourself permission to be fully you, even without approval, you are free. He held up the prayer beads. Each of us was born with a sacred thread inside. But the world wraps us in costumes, masks, and scripts. We forget the thread exists. But when we sit in stillness, when we listen inwardly, we begin to feel it again. That thread is truth, and it will always lead you home. The wind picked up slightly. Kato looked out across the mountain range. What once looked imposing now seemed welcoming. He understood now. The real journey was not one of distance but of depth. As they stood, Master Anzu said one final thing. Walk into the world not as an actor, but as a mirror. Let your presence reflect truth, your silence invite peace, and your actions flow from who you are, not who you think you should be. Kato bowed, but it wasn't the bow of a student to a master. It was the bow of a soul to itself. And so concludes the final lesson of this journey. But endings are only invitations for deeper beginnings.